They weren't supposed to survive the desert. The heat topped 130 degrees. Horses collapsed mid-scene, and one explosion went off so close it singed an actor's hair. The Professionals wasn't just a western about mercenaries crossing into Mexico. It was a war zone disguised as a film set. Scenes were shot in conditions so brutal the crew called it suicide. The star refused to do a love scene, and one actor, he brought a real machine gun to set just to prove a point. These are 20 weird facts about the Professionals. And the bonus? Wait until you hear about the stunt that Lee Marvin pulled off drunk because the director said it couldn't be done sober. Load up. This ride gets dangerous fast. Before a single frame was shot, the studio wanted Steve McQueen and Paul Newman. Big names, bigger box office, safe choices. Columbia Pictures had the script, had the budget, and had a very clear vision of what would sell tickets in 1966. Two pretty faces, two bankable stars, two actors who could charm their way through anything. Richard Brooks, the director, said no, and he didn't just say no politely. He fought. He didn't want movie stars playing tough. He wanted men who looked like they'd actually killed people, men whose faces told stories before they opened their mouths. So he went after Lee Marvin and Burt Lancaster, two actors with military backgrounds and faces carved from experience, weathered by life and war. Marvin had survived the Pacific Theater during World War II, wounded at Saipan with a bullet that severed his sciatic nerve, earned a Purple Heart, while watching men die around him. Lancaster had been a circus acrobat before Hollywood, all muscle and fearlessness, a man who'd spent years defying death under the big top. When they met for the first time on set, they didn't shake hands like colleagues. They didn't smile for the cameras. They just stared at each other like two wolves sizing up territory, measuring strength, calculating respect. The studio panicked, worried audiences wouldn't connect with actors who looked mean, who didn't have that leading man polish, but Brooks knew better. He wasn't making a western. He was making a war film dressed in spurs, a story about violence and loyalty and men who'd seen too much. And he needed soldiers, not stars, men who understood what it meant to follow orders into hell. Death Valley in July. That was the location Richard Brooks chose. The crew thought he was insane. Temperatures hit 130 degrees in the shade, and there was no shade anywhere. The ground was so hot it melted the soles of boots, warped the wooden tripods, turned metal equipment into branding irons. Camera film expanded inside the canisters, sometimes ruining entire reels. Actors had to drink salt tablets just to stay conscious, downing water by the gallon while sweating it out within minutes. During one afternoon shoot, 3 crew members collapsed from heat exhaustion within an hour, dropping like stones while setting up a shot. Medics were on standby, rotating ice packs, pouring water over anyone who looked pale, monitoring everyone for signs of heat stroke. The insurance company sent representatives to shut down production. They showed Brooks the weather reports, the medical reports, the liability reports. Brooks refused to move the production. He wanted the desert to feel like an enemy, not a backdrop, not just scenery, but an active threat. He told the cast, "If you're not suffering, the audience won't believe it. I need them to feel the heat through the screen." And they suffered. Burt Lancaster lost 15 pounds during filming, his face gaunt, his body dehydrated despite constant water intake. Lee Marvin's skin blistered so badly from sun exposure, he had to wrap his hands in gauze between takes, his forearms covered in burns. Woody Strode later said it felt less like making a movie and more like surviving one, like they were actually crossing a desert on a deadly mission. Horses collapsed during scenes, had to be revived with water and rest, rotated out every few hours. One day, the temperature inside an actor's trailer hit 140 degrees. The metal door handle was too hot to touch. The desert wasn't just a location, it was the 5th mercenary, and it nearly killed them all before they could finish filming.
Dynamiter. A man with a delicate touch to blow out a candle without putting it...
Burt Lancaster wasn't supposed to do his own stunts. At 52 years old, with a bad back from decades of acrobatics and a medical history that made insurance adjusters nervous, the production company forbade it. They had stunt doubles ready, professional riders, men who made a living falling off horses and walking away. But Lancaster ignored them completely. During the canyon chase sequence, he insisted on riding full speed through narrow rock passages, no double, no safety wires, No second camera unit to fake it. The crew tried to stop him. The assistant director pleaded. Brooks tried to reason with him, citing insurance, liability, the entire production hanging in the balance. Lancaster just smiled and said, "If I'm going to die, I'm going to die doing something interesting, not sitting in a chair somewhere." On the fifth take, racing through a tight corridor of rock formations, his horse stumbled on loose gravel, its front legs buckling. For a split second, everyone froze. The entire crew held their breath, waiting for Lancaster to go down, to hit the rocks, to end the production right there. Lancaster didn't panic. He leaned back instinctively, shifted his weight with the grace of a man who'd spent years on high wires, and pulled the horse upright mid-stride, muscles straining, somehow keeping both of them from crashing. It looked choreographed, rehearsed, perfectly timed. It was pure instinct and 50 years of physical training. When he rode back to camera, breathing hard, the horse lathered in sweat, the entire crew erupted in applause. Grips, camera operators, everyone. Brooks walked up slowly, shook his head with a mixture of anger and admiration and said, "You're fired," right after we finished the movie. Lancaster laughed. He did 90% of his own stunts in that film. At 52, with a bad back, because sitting still, being careful, playing it safe, none of that was in his contract or his character.
Ex-cavalryman, cattle boss, wrangler, bullwhacker, packman.
Robert Ryan played Hans Ehrengard, the explosives expert, the quiet one, the thinker of the group. But on set, away from the cameras, he was the rebel with a conscience. Ryan was a political activist, an outspoken liberal in an industry terrified of controversy, a man who'd marched for civil rights when it could end a career. While filming in Nevada during the first week of production, he learned the crew was staying at a hotel that refused to serve black guests. It wasn't advertised, wasn't explicit, just quietly enforced. Woody Strode, the only black actor in the main cast, had been quietly sent to a different motel across town. A rundown place with no air conditioning, no room service, segregated by design. Ryan found out by accident, overheard a conversation, asked questions, and he exploded. He confronted the hotel manager in the lobby, in front of other guests, raising his voice about discrimination and basic human dignity. He threatened to walk off the production entirely, to take the story public, to make sure everyone knew. Brooks backed him immediately. The studio panicked. They had schedules, contracts, location permits. Moving an entire production crew was expensive and complicated. But within 24 hours, phones ringing, lawyers arguing, the crew packed up and moved to a different location. And Woody Strode stayed in the same hotel as everyone else. Ryan didn't talk about it afterward. He didn't give interviews. He didn't want credit or recognition. He just showed up to set the next day, memorized his lines, and blew up a fake bridge like nothing had happened. Because to him, doing the right thing wasn't heroic. It was just basic. It was just what you did if you had any decency at all. The script called for Claudia Cardinale to fall in love with her kidnapper, Jack Palance's character, a damsel turned willing captive, a romantic twist meant to justify the final act and add emotional complexity. But Cardinale hated it. She thought it was weak, unrealistic, insulting to women and to intelligence. She argued with Richard Brooks for days, sitting in his trailer, explaining why the scene didn't work, why her character wouldn't behave that way. Brooks didn't budge. He told her, "This is the story. This is what we're filming. It's already written." So Cardinale did something brilliant, something subversive. She played it cold. She didn't refuse. She didn't walk off. She just changed everything through performance. Every romantic line she delivered with distance, with calculation. Every moment of supposed affection she layered with ambiguity, with guardedness. It wasn't love. It was survival. It was a woman doing what she had to do to stay alive. And when audiences watched the film in theaters, they saw something far more complex than the script intended. Was she manipulating her captor? Was she protecting herself? Was there real feeling or just strategy? The script said one thing clearly. Cardinale's performance said another entirely. And decades later, critics still debate what her character Maria actually felt, what motivated her choices. She didn't rewrite the script. She didn't change the words. She rewrote the subtext with her eyes, her pauses, Her voice, she turned a cliché into a mystery.
Jesus, Raza. Jesus.
Jack Palance was supposed to be the villain, plain and simple. A Mexican revolutionary named Raza, holding a woman for ransom, brutal and one-dimensional, the obstacle the heroes had to overcome. But Palance didn't play it that way. He couldn't. He brought honor to the role, philosophy, even humor. He rewrote some of his own dialogue, improvised lines that gave his character a code, a history, a reason for everything. Brooks initially resisted. This was supposed to be simple, straightforward. Good guys, bad guy, rescue mission, clear moral lines. But as filming progressed, as Palance delivered scene after scene, something shifted in the entire production. Palance's performance was so compelling, so layered, so human, that the line between hero and villain started to blur completely. He played Raza as a revolutionary with principles, a man betrayed, a man fighting for something real. In one scene, he explains why he fights, why he won't stop, and suddenly the audience isn't sure who to root for anymore. By the final cut, the mercenaries weren't just rescuing a woman. They were questioning why they were there at all, whether they were on the right side, whether their mission was just. The Professionals became one of the first westerns where the bad guy had a legitimate point, where moral certainty dissolved. And it was all because Jack Palance refused to play a cartoon villain, refused to make it easy. The train explosion wasn't faked. No miniatures, no rear projection, no scale models, no digital tricks because digital didn't exist yet. They loaded an actual vintage locomotive with high explosives, set it on a collision course with a wooden trestle bridge, and detonated the whole thing in one take. One chance. The blast was so massive it shattered windows in a town 5 miles away. Local residents called the police thinking there'd been an industrial accident. The crew had one camera angle, one opportunity to get it right. If the timing was off by even a second, if the train derailed too early, or the charges didn't sync perfectly, the whole sequence was lost forever. Richard Brooks stood behind the camera, sweating through his shirt despite the early morning chill, watching the train barrel forward, gaining speed. The explosives expert counted down over a radio. 3, 2, 1. The bridge erupted in a fireball. The train hit the collapsing structure, flipped sideways, twisted metal screaming, and crashed in an explosion that climbed 200 feet into the desert sky. Flames, debris, smoke. The camera kept rolling through all of it. When the smoke finally cleared minutes later, Brooks didn't say a word. He just walked away from the camera, lit a cigarette with shaking hands, because there was nothing left to say. They'd done the impossible. They'd destroyed something real, captured something unrepeatable, and they only had enough money to do it once. If it hadn't worked, that scene would have been cut from the film entirely. Lee Marvin brought his own machine gun to set, not a prop gun, not a replica, a real, fully functional weapon from World War II that he'd somehow kept. He told Richard Brooks he wanted the action to look authentic, and the only way to do that was to handle the real thing, to feel the weight, the kick, the mechanics. The studio legal department went ballistic when they found out. Lawyers threatened to shut down production. Insurance adjusters had panic attacks, but Marvin didn't care. He'd carried that type of gun through actual war, through actual combat, and he wasn't about to fake it for a camera. Brooks made a deal to calm everyone down. Marvin could handle the real weapon during rehearsals to get the weight right, the feel right, the mechanics into his muscle memory. But during filming, during actual takes, he'd use the approved prop gun. Marvin agreed, sort of. During one crucial action sequence, he accidentally grabbed his personal weapon instead of the prop. Nobody noticed in the chaos of filming. The gun fired blanks, but real blanks from a real gun. Nobody caught it until post-production when the sound editor was mixing audio and realized the gunfire was too authentic, too raw, the acoustics all wrong for a prop. They had to overdub the entire sequence with stock sound effects. Marvin never apologized. When confronted, he just shrugged and said, "Now you know what real sounds like. You're welcome." The love scene between Burt Lancaster and Claudia Cardinale never happened. It was written into the script, blocked out by the director, rehearsed in read-throughs. But when the day came to shoot it, When the set was lit and the cameras were ready, Lancaster refused to do it. Not because of Cardinale, not because of the scene itself, because of his wife. Lancaster had a complicated personal life, relationships that made gossip columnists rich, but he'd made a promise. No romantic scenes with co-stars, no kissing, no intimacy, period. It was a line he wouldn't cross, maybe the only professional line he respected. Brooks was furious. The scene was critical to the story arc, or so he thought, necessary for character development and emotional payoff. Lancaster stood firm. No arguments, no negotiation, just no. So Brooks rewrote it overnight. Angry, frustrated, forced to improvise. Instead of a love scene, they shot a tense, almost hostile conversation. Lancaster cold, distant, Cardinale guarded, careful, no touching, no softness, just two people talking and not saying what they mean. And somehow it worked better than the original plan. The absence of romance made the tension stronger, made everything more dangerous. What could have been a predictable Hollywood cliché became something uncomfortable, something real. Lancaster lost the love scene he never wanted, but the movie gained an edge it wouldn't have had otherwise. Woody Strode wasn't just an actor in The Professionals, he was a statement. In 1966, a black man playing a skilled professional, an equal to white mercenaries treated with respect and complexity, given his own storyline, that didn't happen in Hollywood. Studios were terrified of Southern audiences, of boycotts, of controversy. But Richard Brooks insisted on casting Strode. Strode had been a professional football player before the NFL integrated, a decathlon competitor, a man who carried himself with quiet dignity and physical power. On screen, his character, Jake Sharp, was the group's scout and horse expert, treated as an equal by the other mercenaries. Off-screen, Strode dealt with racism from local crew members, hostile stares from townspeople, and studio executives who constantly questioned his casting. But he never wavered, never complained publicly, just showed up and did the work. During one scene, a local extra hired for a crowd sequence refused to take direction from him. The extra just stood there, arms crossed, staring. Strode didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just walked over slowly, stood in front of the man, and stared in complete silence. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. The extra folded, looked away, mumbled an apology. The scene continued. Because Woody Strode didn't need to shout to command a room. His presence, his dignity, his absolute certainty, that was enough. He'd spent his whole life proving he belonged, and he wasn't about to stop for some extra on a film set. Richard Brooks didn't trust scripts, not completely. He believed the best moments came from chaos, from actors pushed beyond their preparation into pure instinct. So during the ambush scene, he didn't tell the cast when the explosions would detonate. He just said, "React naturally." The pyrotechnics team had the timing, Brooks had the camera, and the actors had no idea what was about to hit them. When the charges blew, dirt and debris erupted 20 feet into the air. Lee Marvin dove for cover a split second before shrapnel whistled past his head. Lancaster rolled behind a rock, genuinely startled. Robert Ryan's face, caught in close-up, showed real fear for just a fraction of a second before his training kicked in. The takes were electric, unrepeatable. After the scene wrapped, Marvin walked up to Brooks and said, "If you ever do that again, I'm shooting you with a real bullet." Brooks just smiled. He'd gotten what he needed, terror that looked authentic because it was authentic. The actors forgave him eventually, but they never fully trusted him again. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that edge, that uncertainty, that's what made every scene feel dangerous. The horses weren't actors, they were survivors. During one chase sequence, a mare collapsed mid-gallop from heat exhaustion, just fell sideways, legs buckling, 1,200 pounds of muscle hitting the sand like a dropped stone. The rider, a stuntman named Charlie Picerni, barely cleared the saddle before the animal went down. For 10 minutes, everyone thought the horse was dead. The set went silent. The production vet rushed over with water and ice, working frantically. Slowly, the mare's breathing steadied. She survived, but it shook everyone. The American Humane Association wasn't on set. Nobody was monitoring animal welfare. This was 1966, when horses were considered equipment, not lives. After that incident, Brooks ordered mandatory rest periods for all animals, extra water stations, shade structures built specifically for the horses. The studio complained about the cost. Brooks threatened to walk. The horses got their protection. It wasn't enough, not by modern standards, but for 1966, it was revolutionary. One collapsed horse changed how the entire production operated, because even in a film about killers, somebody had to care about the innocent. Jack Palance rewrote the ending, not officially, not in script meetings or studio conferences. He did it on camera, in the moment, with dialogue that never appeared on any page. The scripted final confrontation was simple. Raza dies, the mercenaries ride away, credits roll, but Palance felt his character deserved more, deserved a death that meant something. So during the final take, after he'd been shot, instead of falling immediately, he stayed on his feet. He looked at Burt Lancaster and delivered a line nobody had written. "You're better than most, but not better than me." Then he smiled, touched his hat, and collapsed. Brooks didn't yell cut. The cameras kept rolling. Lancaster, to his credit, didn't break. He just stood there, absorbing the moment, letting it breathe. When the scene ended, Brooks walked over to Palance lying in the dirt and said, "Where'd that come from?" Palance replied, "It's what he would have said. They kept it in the film." That one improvised moment gave Raza dignity and death, made him heroic instead of defeated, and it changed the entire tone of the ending. Suddenly, the mercenaries weren't victors, they were just survivors, and Raza wasn't a villain. He was a man who fought for what he believed in and died on his own terms. Number 14. Lee Marvin did the cliff descent drunk. It wasn't planned, it wasn't professional, but it might have been the best stunt in the entire film. The scene required him to rappel down a 60-foot rock face while under fire, a dangerous sequence even for experienced climbers with full safety gear. The stunt coordinator mapped it out, tested the ropes, set up redundant safety systems. But Marvin, the night before filming, got into the whiskey, hard. By morning, he was still drunk, stumbling slightly, eyes red. Brooks saw him and said, "We're postponing." Marvin said, "No, we're not." He walked to the cliff edge, grabbed the rope, and went over before anyone could stop him. The crew panicked. The safety team rushed to their positions, and Marvin descended that cliff with the smooth confidence of a man who'd faced worse sober. His movements were loose, almost lazy, completely fearless. When he reached the bottom, he turned to the camera and saluted. Brooks was furious and impressed in equal measure. He used the take. Because drunk or sober, Lee Marvin made falling off a cliff look like a casual afternoon activity. Later, Marvin said, "The trick to dangerous stunts is not thinking about them. Whiskey helps with that."
What's the matter, woman there? Beautiful.
Claudia Cardinale couldn't ride, at all. She'd never been on a horse before arriving in Nevada. The script had her riding side saddle, a Victorian technique that requires balance, core strength, and hours of practice. She had days. The wranglers tried to teach her, spent long afternoons in the corral working on basics. But side saddle riding is complex, almost impossible for beginners, so they made a choice. During wide shots, they used a double. During close-ups, they put Cardinale on a horse that wasn't moving, just standing still while the camera dollied to create the illusion of movement. During one scene, they strapped the horse to a hidden platform that rocked gently, making it look like the animal was walking. Cardinale sold it with her posture, her expression, her absolute commitment, and audiences never noticed. They saw a woman riding confidently through the desert. The reality was cables, platforms, careful editing, and one very patient horse who understood his job was to stand perfectly still, while an Italian actress pretended she knew what she was doing. Movie magic isn't always explosions and stunts. Sometimes it's just hiding the fact that your leading lady can't ride the horse she's sitting on. The movie almost lost its title. 3 weeks before release, Columbia's legal department discovered another film called The Professionals had been registered years earlier by a small production company in England. It was never made, never released, existed only as a copyright filing. But legally, they had priority. The studio panicked. Posters were printed, trailers were in theaters, marketing materials had shipped worldwide. Changing the title would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and delay the release. Brooks refused to budge. "We're the professionals," he said. "Find another way." Columbia's lawyers negotiated for 2 weeks straight, finally buying the title rights for an undisclosed sum. The English production company, which had no intention of ever making their film, suddenly had a windfall, and The Professionals kept its name. Years later, Brooks admitted he would have walked away from the film if they'd forced a title change. Not because of ego, because the title defined everything. 4 professionals doing a job. No other name would have worked. Sometimes the right title is worth fighting for, even if it costs a fortune.
Yes, ma'am.
Robert Ryan kept a journal during filming. Every night in his trailer he'd write about the day. Not gossip, not complaints, observations, character notes, political thoughts. Decades later, excerpts were published, and they revealed something fascinating. Ryan hated his character. He thought Hans was underwritten, one-dimensional, the explosives expert reduced to a man who blew things up, but he couldn't figure out how to fix it. So he started adding tiny gestures. The way Hans cleaned his glasses, how he'd pause before answering questions, small moments of hesitation that suggested a man thinking 3 steps ahead. None of it was scripted. During one scene, he had libbed a line about his father being a watchmaker, adding backstory that explained his precision, his patience. Brooks kept it. Those small additions didn't make Hans the star, but they made him real. They gave him dimension the script never provided. And it was all because Ryan refused to play a type. He insisted on playing a person, even when the writing didn't support it. That journal entry ended with, "If they don't give you a character, build one yourself, brick by brick. Nobody else will do it for you." The Mexican government almost shut down production. Not the American filming, the Mexican filming. Part of the movie was shot across the border, scenes requiring authentic locations the Nevada desert couldn't provide. But when officials saw the script, they objected. The portrayal of Mexican revolutionaries, the violence, the politics, it made them uncomfortable. They worried the film would depict Mexico as lawless and savage. Negotiations went back and forth for weeks. Brooks flew to Mexico City, met with government officials, explained his vision. He argued the film showed Mexican revolutionaries as heroes, as men fighting for freedom against corruption. But officials remained skeptical. Finally, a compromise. Brooks would hire Mexican consultants to ensure cultural accuracy. He'd employ local crews, and he'd remove one scene, a brutal execution that officials deemed too inflammatory. Brooks agreed to everything except removing the scene. He said he'd shoot it anyway and deal with consequences later. The officials relented, probably realizing Brooks would do what he wanted regardless. The Mexican sequences were filmed without incident, and when the movie premiered in Mexico City months later, audiences cheered. Because Brooks was right. The revolutionaries weren't villains, they were patriots, and Mexican audiences understood that immediately. The film's composer, Maurice Jarre, never visited the set. He scored the entire movie from his studio in Paris, working from rough cuts and written descriptions. Brooks didn't want him there. He wanted Jarre to create music based purely on the images, without being influenced by the heat, the exhaustion, the chaos of production. Jarre composed a score that was half Western, half war film. Sweeping strings for the desert landscapes, militant percussion for action sequences, melancholy horns for moments of reflection. When Brooks first heard it, he said nothing. He just played it again and again, 5 times in a row without speaking. Jarre, listening over the phone from Paris, thought it was rejected. Then Brooks finally spoke. "Don't change anything." The score was recorded in 3 days with a full orchestra. No overdubs, no corrections, just musicians playing Jarre's composition start to finish like a live concert. That urgency, that lack of polish, gave the music a raw energy that matched the film perfectly. Jarre never saw the Nevada desert. He never felt the 130-degree heat. But somehow, his score captured it all. Because great art doesn't require presence, it requires understanding. And Jarre understood what Brooks was making, even from 6,000 miles away. After filming wrapped, the cast scattered immediately. No wrap party, no tearful goodbyes. They'd survived something together, but they didn't want to celebrate it. Lancaster flew home the same day, didn't attend the premiere months later. Marvin disappeared into Mexico for 2 weeks, unreachable. Ryan went back to political activism, barely mentioned the film in interviews. Strode moved on to the next job, another Western where he'd fight to be seen as more than scenery. And Brooks locked himself in an editing room for 3 months, obsessively cutting and recutting until the studio physically removed him. When The Professionals finally opened in November 1966, it was a massive hit. Critics loved it. Audiences packed theaters. It earned 3 Academy Award nominations, including Best Director for Brooks, but the people who made it never reunited. Years later, a journalist asked Brooks why. He said, "We went to war together, and when war ends, you don't have reunions. You just try to forget how close you came to not making it back." The Professionals wasn't a film for its cast. It was an ordeal, a test, a gauntlet they survived, and the only way to move forward was to leave it behind in the Nevada desert where it belonged, buried in sand and memory.